Carré Otis emerged in the modeling scene during an era where beauty wasn't just celebrated, it was commodified, glamorized, and weaponized. The 1980s and 90s fashion industry prized a very particular image, one that was unattainable, sculpted, and often stripped of authenticity. Carré fit that image like a glove. With her piercing gaze, sculptural features, and sensual presence, she wasn't just another model. She was a muse, a fantasy, a brand. Her face adorned the covers of Vogue, Elle, and Marie Claire. She became a household name when she fronted major campaigns for Guess and Calvin Klein. On runways, her walk was both commanding and ethereal, as if she were both above and beyond the world watching her. But while the public saw only the surface, the clothes, the lights, the poses, few knew the psychological toll this industry demanded from its stars. For Carré, the rise wasn't merely fast, it was overwhelming. She was thrust into an ecosystem that packaged and sold femininity, but left little room for vulnerability, boundaries, or consent. She was very young when she started, and like many models of that era, her career was managed almost entirely by others' agents, casting directors, photographers, and designers, most of whom were men. They decided where she went, what she wore, how she looked, and how thin she had to be. The illusion of glamour was thick and intoxicating. Fashion Week in Paris. Exclusive parties in New York. Magazine covers. International ad campaigns. From the outside, Carré appeared to be living the dream that millions fantasized about. But behind the camera flashes, there was a quiet, growing sense of powerlessness. She was praised for her looks, but ignored as a human being. Her body became a product, her image a tool to sell, and her silence a requirement. She was frequently told what to do and how to behave if she wanted to keep working. Like many others in the industry, she experienced intense pressure to maintain an unhealthy weight. Eating disorders, though common, were rarely addressed, let alone treated. Drug use was normalized. Sexual harassment wasn't spoken about, it was endured. And despite the industry's luxurious exterior, Carré often felt trapped. Even as she gained fame, she lost autonomy. Her relationship with fashion became conflicted. The very world that made her famous also silenced her. She couldn't say no without risking her livelihood. She couldn't question power without consequences. Her job was to smile, walk, pose, and remain quiet. The contradiction was brutal. She was one of the most visible women in the world, yet completely invisible where it mattered. Carré's rise to fame was not a celebration of personal triumph. It was a case study in how the fashion industry took beautiful young women, idolized them publicly, and then erased their voices. It sold fairy tales while silencing the reality. Carré was living proof of how glamour and control could coexist, and how behind every runway fantasy, there was often a painful, invisible truth. Behind every flawless editorial and every glowing runway appearance was a hidden world that few dared to talk about, a world Carré Otis knew intimately. The fashion industry of the late 20th century, while outwardly glamorous, was often built on silence, exploitation, and control. Carré's experience was not unique, but her willingness to speak about it later made her stand out. In the early stages of her career, she learned quickly that being beautiful came with a price, and that price was often paid in the form of silence, submission, and the erasure of boundaries. From the outside, a model's life might seem like a dream, traveling the world, wearing couture, mingling with celebrities, and becoming the face of high-end campaigns. But what the public didn't see were the grueling hours, the invasive scrutiny, and the dangerous power dynamics that shaped every aspect of a model's day-to-day reality. Carré, like many models, was a teenager when she entered this world. She was impressionable, eager to succeed, and surrounded by authority figures who insisted they knew what was best for her career. That meant she was constantly told how to look, how to dress, how to behave, and more importantly, what not to say. Photographers were often revered like gods on set, and their word was law. Many of them operated without boundaries. Models were expected to be agreeable and pliable, to never question what was being asked of them, even if it made them uncomfortable. Posing nude or semi-nude was common, and saying no could lead to professional consequences. Carré found herself in multiple situations where saying no didn't feel like an option. Behind the camera, the environment could turn predatory, and beneath the surface of every glamorous photo shoot was a harsh reality of manipulation, objectification, and exploitation. Power dynamics weren't just limited to the studio. They extended into agencies, casting rooms, and private dinners with industry insiders. Carré's relationships with powerful men were often characterized by imbalance: older, wealthier men who saw models not as people, but as accessories to be owned, controlled, or discarded. Romantic entanglements blurred into professional transactions. Models were frequently expected to attend events, dinners, or even private meetings where their presence was a form of currency. This culture thrived on secrecy. No one talked about what really happened behind closed doors. To survive in the industry, Carré learned to suppress her instincts, to compartmentalize pain, and to mask discomfort with a practiced smile. She experienced firsthand how the fashion world profited off women's bodies while ignoring their voices. Complaints were dismissed. Boundaries were crossed. The more successful she became, the more isolated she often felt. No matter how high she climbed, there was always someone more powerful pulling the strings. Carré's silence wasn't chosen, it was conditioned. Over time, she came to understand that the world she inhabited was built to protect predators and punish truth-tellers. Every photoshoot that looked like magic to the outside world had a darker undercurrent. The reality behind the camera was not soft lights and beauty, it was pressure, fear, and control. Carré Otis eventually became more than just a model. She became a symbol of quiet resistance within an industry that thrived on control. As her fame grew, so did her discomfort with the roles she was expected to play, both professionally and personally. The fashion world wanted her to remain a beautiful, silent figurehead, one who could embody whatever image a designer or brand desired. But inside, Carré was beginning to feel the weight of the expectations, the secrets she was carrying, and the contradictions she lived through daily. She had seen too much, experienced too much, and endured the emotional and physical toll of a system that demanded compliance without question. She began to recognize how deeply embedded the power structures were, how agencies, clients, photographers, and even media outlets played a role in keeping models in their place. Models were meant to be aspirational, but not outspoken. Beautiful, but not defiant. When Carré began questioning the conditions of her work, the expectations around nudity, the pressure to stay dangerously thin, the lack of protections from predatory behavior, she quickly realized that pushing back came with consequences. The industry didn't tolerate dissent, especially not from women who had built their careers on image. Once you started challenging the system, you became a liability. Carré's inner rebellion wasn't loud or sudden, it was gradual, a growing awareness that what she had accepted as normal for so long was anything but. She started to understand the mechanisms that allowed powerful men to exploit vulnerable young women with little to no accountability. She had worked with people who were celebrated publicly but behaved with impunity behind closed doors. She had seen the way victims were blamed and silenced, and how the industry protected its own reputations while discarding those who no longer fit the mold. It became clear to her that the glamorous exterior served a purpose. It distracted the world from the suffering underneath. By the time Carré found her voice, she had endured years of manipulation and mistreatment that had chipped away at her confidence. But something within her remained unbroken. She began speaking privately about her experiences, testing the waters to see who could be trusted, and gauging the reaction when she dared to hint at the truth. What she encountered, more often than not, was resistance. People didn't want to hear about the dark side of fashion. It made them uncomfortable. It challenged the fantasy. It forced them to confront the humanity behind the images they consumed so casually. Carré's resistance wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming herself. She no longer wanted to be the silent mannequin, the pliable face of an industry that had used her and so many others as disposable tools. She wanted to dismantle the myth that models had no stories beyond the covers they graced. Speaking out meant pushing against a system that rewarded silence and punished honesty. It meant risking what was left of her career to tell a truth that others were too afraid to name. Carré Otis spent years living within the unspoken rules of a system that normalized control, silenced resistance, and blurred the lines between professionalism and personal violation. At the height of her modeling career, contracts were not just legal documents, they were cages. They dictated everything from her weight to her availability, from her image to her silence. The industry made it clear, her success depended on her ability to be compliant. If she resisted, she risked losing it all. If she spoke up, she would be replaced. These contracts often included strict clauses about morality and appearance, but nothing to protect her from harassment or exploitation. Her body was scrutinized constantly. Her voice, however, was rarely acknowledged. Carré was expected to perform perfection while suppressing the traumas she carried. Speaking about discomfort, abuse, or fear was seen as weakness or worse, as ingratitude. Models were told they were lucky to be there, lucky to be chosen. There was an unspoken pressure to never complain, to never appear difficult, and to maintain a perfect exterior at all costs. In that silence, Carré endured years of control by people who believed her body was their property. There were moments when she wanted to say no to a shoot, to a person, to a situation, but the fear of retaliation kept her quiet. She saw what happened to others who tried. They disappeared from campaigns. Their phones stopped ringing. Their careers faded. This conditioning began early, when she was still a teenager. From the beginning, Carré was taught that obedience was the price of success. She was scouted, trained, and molded by people who told her they knew what was best for her. They dictated her food intake, criticized her appearance, and used her insecurities to maintain control. The contracts weren't just with agencies or brands, they were social contracts, unspoken but powerful, that kept her in line. She had to smile, comply, pose, and never reveal what was really happening behind the polished facade. Carré's silence was never passive, it was a survival strategy. Every time she chose not to speak about something that hurt her, it was a decision made under pressure. She feared not just losing jobs, but being blacklisted. Being labeled difficult was a professional death sentence. Even in moments of private protest, the external forces around her were too strong. The fashion world did not want introspection, vulnerability, or truth from its models. It wanted perfection and performance, nothing more. Over time, the weight of that silence became unbearable. Carré began to question how much of herself she had sacrificed to remain in the good graces of the industry. She realized that the system thrived precisely because so many women were afraid to speak. The fear was not irrational, it was learned. It came from seeing peers pushed out, from knowing that one wrong move could mean the end. This culture of fear, this normalization of silence, was not accidental. It was built to protect those in power and to keep models like Carré from ever believing they had the right to say no. When Carré Otis decided to write her memoir, it wasn't a career move, it was an act of defiance. Her book, Beauty, Disrupted, became a reckoning, not just with her past, but with an entire industry that had profited from her pain. For years, she had been a face on billboards, a name in magazines, a body on runways. But through her memoir, she finally became a voice. She didn't hold back. In raw, unflinching detail, she recounted years of mistreatment, exploitation, and survival. Her words stripped away the gloss and fantasy that had long surrounded her image and revealed the cost of that illusion. In the book, Carré spoke publicly for the first time about the sexual abuse she endured during her relationship with actor Mickey Rourke. She had been cast opposite him in the film Wild Orchid, a project that blurred fiction and reality in uncomfortable ways. Behind the scenes, the relationship turned violent. Carré later revealed that she had been coerced into intimacy and emotionally manipulated throughout their time together. These revelations were not just personal, they shattered the Hollywood romance narrative that had once been sold to the public. She wasn't the wild, seductive starlet the media had imagined. She was a survivor of an abusive relationship. But Carré didn't stop there. She pulled back the curtain on the fashion world, naming the toxic behaviors that had gone unchecked for decades. She wrote about the pressure to be thin at all costs, the constant invasion of privacy, and the silent epidemic of eating disorders among models. She discussed how agencies prioritized profit over safety, how older men in positions of power used models as currency, and how fear was used to keep young women obedient. Her memoir was a mirror held up to an industry that had for too long operated without consequences. The reaction was polarizing. Some praised her courage, calling her a trailblazer for telling the truth in an industry where silence had always been the default. Others dismissed her, questioned her motives, or tried to downplay her experience. But Carré had expected that. She knew that speaking out came with risks. Her memoir challenged powerful institutions, questioned the morality of the fashion elite, and exposed the cracks in an image-obsessed culture. She was no longer interested in being palatable, she was interested in being real. For many women in the modeling and entertainment industries, Carré's book became a lifeline. It validated silent traumas. It gave language to experiences they had buried. Her willingness to name names, confront systems, and tell her truth was not just cathartic for her, it was revolutionary. She offered an alternative narrative, one where models were not just faces, but full human beings with agency, trauma, and the right to speak. Carré's story echoed far beyond the pages of her memoir. It sparked conversations, inspired others to come forward, and forced the fashion world to reckon, even briefly, with its own reflection. Carré Otis's decision to speak out left a ripple effect that stretched far beyond her personal story. Her bravery did not just illuminate the darker corners of the fashion industry, it cracked open a long-silenced conversation about power, consent, and accountability. In an environment built on image, where silence had always been part of the contract, her voice disrupted the narrative. She was no longer just a former model or a headline from the 90s. She became a figure of resistance, a woman who had lived the story from the inside and emerged willing to name what so many others still could not. Her story gave shape to a collective truth, one that many knew but few dared to articulate. Young models, aspiring artists, and even seasoned professionals found resonance in Carré's journey. Her willingness to call out the machine that had once elevated her gave others permission to question it too. The industry's power had long rested on its ability to isolate and divide, convincing models they were alone in their discomfort, that their experiences were isolated rather than systemic. Carré's story proved the opposite. It revealed the pattern, the design, and the deliberate silencing of those who suffered while making others rich. In the years that followed the release of her memoir, Carré became involved in advocacy, focusing on health, safety, and ethics in modeling. She used her platform not just to revisit her own pain, but to push for structural change. She advocated for better protections for models, transparency in contracts, and the acknowledgement of mental health and body autonomy within the industry. Her work helped redefine what it meant to be a model, not just a subject of beauty, but an individual with rights, boundaries, and a voice. Carré's legacy also intersects with the larger cultural movements that followed. As stories of abuse and exploitation surfaced across industries, her voice stood among the early ones that warned the world of how deeply entrenched these patterns were. When the #MeToo movement gained global momentum, many looked back on her story with a renewed sense of respect. She had spoken out before it was safe to do so, before solidarity was trending, and before the world was finally willing to listen. Her impact wasn't limited to the fashion elite or media circles. Everyday women saw parts of themselves in her struggle, the pressure to stay silent, the shame of not being believed, the confusion of loving an industry or a person that hurt them. Carré's story helped normalize the conversation around emotional trauma, body image, and the complex relationship women have with systems that both reward and punish them for speaking up. She showed that truth-telling, while costly, could also be liberating. Her voice became a reminder that change is not instant, but it begins when someone refuses to be erased. She stood not as a victim, but as a survivor, willing to reclaim her story and make sure others felt less alone in theirs.